Hello, I'm Floyd Maxwell, justthinkit.com. This video is called Consequences of a Spring and Loop Theory, Neutrino. The ultimate unknown. Neutrinos are more unknown than known. The most plentiful particle in the universe, unless you count photons as particles, yet we don't even know how much neutrinos weigh. Neutrinos are too small and too good at avoidance to measure directly. As a result, science has taken the LHC approach of creating monster machines to detect handfuls of events. The Standard Model's nemesis. Neutrinos are known to change flavors, yet they are also known to travel at the speed of light. So neutrinos break the Standard Model. Luckily, when something breaks the Standard Model, it is just a matter of quickly erasing one rule and replacing it with two new ones, and a couple of complicated exceptions. Or leave things like gravity unexplained and carry on happily. In any case, the Standard Model wakes up each morning intact, pristine and perfect. Never been proven wrong, we are told over and over again. Of kings and clothes. They must initiate the physics brainwashing after second-year physics, or I would have picked up a dose of the faith myself. In the movie JFK, Walter Matthau dismisses the lone gunman theory with, "That dog don't hunt." The Standard Model would love to kill off the neutrino question, so let's seek answers elsewhere. What we know for sure. Numerous experiments have confirmed that neutrinos travel at the speed of light, within the limits of experimental accuracy. Neutrinos are also of minimal mass, with the current upper bound on their size being 0.23 electron volts. The electron, the next lightest particle, is at least 2 million times heavier than the neutrino. Our original assumption. Spring and loop theory has assumed from day one that neutrinos were springs. Given that neutrinos were known for their non-interaction, spring and loop theory imagined them as ball-shaped due to self-binding. This accounted for their being able to penetrate almost everything and yet react with almost nothing. Our new assumption. Today, spring and loop theory goes one stage further, which, true to form, means one stage simpler. Spring and loop theory thinks neutrinos are simply springs. Surplus springs, mind you, but not self-bonded. Ground rules review. Spring and loop theory is a remodeling of physics. Spring and loop theory says the universe is entirely full of ultra-intense, ultra-tiny bundles of energy. Dubbed the universal matrix, this energy system is most easily visualized as spring-like. Matter is stabilized loops of a lower-level energy. As discussed in other COASALT talks, the interaction of loops and springs is what makes everything. Atoms, molecules, and particles, waves, and space itself. Ground rules part 2. Spring and loop theory sees loops contracting spring space as the cause of gravity. Imagine putting a clamp on a fish net. The small effect would be felt everywhere in the net. Springs hitting against springs is the electromagnetic force. Just as sound is transmitted through solid material, so is light and other radiation propagated through the universal matrix of springs. The strong force is springs clamping onto loops. Springs letting go of loops, and as a result thrashing around in the most intense way imaginable, is the weak force. So where do neutrinos fit in? Conventional physics says, quote, neutrinos interact primarily through the weak force. Spring and loop theory says that when atoms decompose, springs thrash around before recombining. But in some atomic transformations, one or more springs get left out in the cold. Neutrinos are one possible atomic splitting and joining product and byproduct. It's raining neutrinos. The sun is fusion powered and bigger than everything else in the solar system put together. It is naturally our biggest source of neutrinos. But other stars can send neutrinos our way too. Lots of testing, few results. We have a few facts. 1 billion neutrinos for every atom in the universe. 1 trillion passing through your thumbnail every second. Just one neutrino per lifetime interacting with your body. But it's all still pretty mysterious, n'est-ce pas? Orphans in a spring verse. In response to a Wikipedia list of unsolved problems in physics question, spring and loop theory proposed that the sun is a system supersaturated with springs. On Earth, all loops are spring-saturated. Like happily bonded atoms, earthly spring loop systems are content and stable. Space has no loops, approximately. It is a springs-only system that is saturated, but not supersaturated. You better run. When a system has an excess of springs, something has to happen to equilibrate things. In World War II, submarines had a big challenge: how to hit a ship on the high seas. Simply aiming and firing a torpedo was largely ineffective, as ships could simply turn toward or away from the torpedo, and sometimes torpedoes found their way back to the submarine. This led to conditional arming and disarming of the torpedo. Further refinements involved having the torpedo seek the ideal depth to do the most damage to a ship. Subatomic torpedoes. The sun may be the ultimate submarine, and is quite untroubled by thoughts of friendly fire. It dispenses with leftover neutrinos by firing them out into space. A continuous nuclear explosion fueled by 1 million Earths worth of feedstock ensures the sun is and will remain the mightiest submarine of them all. For all time, or another 5 billion years, whichever comes first. Calculations. So how many neutrinos does the sun launch per second? According to one source, the sun emits about 10 to the 38 neutrinos per second. Wikipedia adds that about 65 billion solar neutrinos per second pass through every square centimeter perpendicular to the direction of the sun in the region of the Earth. Let's assume the 100 billion stars per galaxy in each of the 100 billion galaxies are all making as many neutrinos per second as our sun. 10 to the 38 neutrinos times 10 to the 11 stars per galaxy times 10 to the 11 galaxies, and we get 10 to the 60 neutrinos per second are being liberated in the universe. The universe is about 100 billion light years in diameter, giving it a volume of 500,000 cubic light years. The expansion rate of the universe is 46 miles per second per megaparsec. In 1 second, the universe expands 1.5 million miles. And the volume of that expansion works out to 10 to the 49 cubic miles of new space every second. Borrowing from COASALT 8 quantum world, the Planck volume is 4 times 10 to the minus 105 meters cubed. With 4 times 10 to the 9 meters cubed per mile cubed, that gives you a Planck volume in miles cubed of 10 to the minus 114. 10 to the 60 neutrinos created every second in the universe, with each having a volume of 10 to the minus 114 miles cubed, adds up to 10 to the minus 54 of a cubic mile of newly liberated neutrinos every second. This is about a factor of 10 to the 103 times too few neutrinos to account for the expansion rate of the universe by neutrino creation alone. Additional considerations. One thing this calculation did not do was take into account how long neutrinos survive before they weak force interact. The rule of thumb is that a beam of neutrinos could pass through a light year of lead with only half the beam being absorbed. We'll take that as a neutrino half-life of 1 year. Discussion. The half-life estimate is based on neutrinos traveling through a solid material the whole time. Whether they last more or less time when traveling through space alone is up for debate. Given that the through a light year of lead estimate is no doubt based on how many the sun creates versus how many hit our test objects 93 million miles away, it is probably a fairly close approximation. The 10 to the 22 from the cosmos versus 10 to the 10 from the sun disparity shown here suggests our assumption may be reasonable. 31 million seconds in a year increases our neutrino density by a factor of 10 to the 7, but we are still a factor of 10 to the 96 short. By the way, physicists assume neutrinos from space equals the cosmic microwave background temperature. The 330 million low-energy neutrinos per cubic meter from non-sun sources are all assumed by physicists to be the residual effect from the Big Bang. Attribution issues aside, and given that the standard model expects space to have a temperature 10 to the 120 times higher than what is measured, we could assume 10 to the 120 times as many neutrinos per meter cubed. Not so fast. Even though a 10 to the 120 increase in neutrinos gets us in the ballpark to explain the expansion of the universe with neutrinos alone, spring and loop theory doesn't think much of this calculation. The 330 million space neutrinos are just those being created by stars outside our solar system, period. And the CMB temperature measurement is way off because we can't measure the temperature of spring-only systems. But what is space expansion anyway? All is not lost because we don't need neutrinos to create space. All we need to inflate a balloon is pressure. Each neutrino, being a spring, happens to be the most powerful source of pressure there is. As discussed in COASALT 1, the speed of light, the springs that fill every Planck volume of the entire universe are already enough to expand space. Newly orphaned neutrinos just provide a little kick. Okay, maybe a lot. Neutrinos could be responsible for the accelerated expansion of the universe. Every second, 10 to the 60 neutrinos get created and have no final destination for but a year. Left unattended, they increase the pressure of the system, giving us a universe that has nowhere to go but out in all directions. The latest dilemma. In a July 2014 Physics World paper, physicists tried to explain the supernova SN 1987A anomalous neutrino versus photon arrival time using today's accepted theories, general relativity and quantum mechanics. General relativity says neutrinos and photons should arrive at the same time. The fact that they don't breaks general relativity. Quantum mechanics can at least come up with a theory. See if this sounds reasonable to you. A photon propagating through space can occasionally annihilate with itself, creating a virtual electron-positron pair. Soon after, the electron and positron recombine to recreate the photon. If they are in a gravitational potential, then, for the short time they exist as massive particles, they feel the effect of gravity. Toughening spring and loop theory. Spring and loop theory can also theorize why neutrinos arrive first. But first, spring and loop theory will reiterate that photons are never particles, so they can't split into virtual electron-positron pairs. In this paper, spring and loop theory has stated that neutrinos are pure, unadulterated springs. The springs of the universal matrix, however, are not pure in that they are altered, i.e. reduced in energy, by matter loops. So neutrinos will pass through space without being slowed, while photons, i.e. spring bumps, will be slowed by mass. Poor models survive by the heavy use of duct tape. Good models get stronger under the same conditions. Being able to account for and model neutrinos traveling through space faster than photons makes spring and loop theory a more accurate model. No shims, tape, or new parts were needed. In addition, spring and loop theory can now predict that the most accurate time measurers for intergalactic events like supernovas will be neutrinos. 1 footnote. Rutherford described a neutron as a proton-electron doublet. It turns out that a proton and an electron are held together by a neutrino, i.e. by a spring. In the nucleus, all roads lead to Rome, and the proton-electron double is mainly held together by gravity, by space bending. When a neutron is by itself, it is like a tree that, having grown up in a forest, is now forced to stand alone. The winds in this case are the ultra-forceful springs that outnumber particles by a factor of 10 to the 73. A little buffeting and the neutrino, i.e. spring, bond, breaks, decaying the neutron.